Hi everyone, my name is Mzalendo Halisi, Board Chair, This is Africa, and welcome to the Changamka Show. What is Changamka? Changamka Kenya Show is about changing narratives, discussing the issues we always discuss every day, but from a different perspective. Because we keep seeing the same problems coming through, the same problems we've been facing since we said we are going to eliminate hunger, ignorance, and disease at independence. But somehow, we are unable to deal with these issues. We are unable to sort out our problems. We find today there are very many young people. Majority of the Kenyan population is under 35, more than I think, is it 70%? Yet the Kenyan economy is not creating jobs. Many prescriptions are given in terms of why we have the situation we are in. There are a few issues that keep coming up. There's tribalism, there's corruption, there's discrimination, marginalization in terms of gender and other issues. And that all that coupled with youth unemployment then has put us in the situation where it's untenable, it's not manageable. And the question is, what do we do about this thing? And what Changamka is trying to do is reframe the issues so that we don't have these conversations from the same place where we've been having them, to try and now actively seek solutions. And you're not looking to government, you're not looking to NGOs, you're not looking to any one particular sector, but Kenyans themselves to try and come up with the solutions to the challenges that we are having. And one of the things that we feel as This is Africa, and the reason why we've come up with Changamka Kenya Show is to say that as much as these issues are problematic, if we change our attitude, we can be able to start solving these issues. And we have many solutions that people have come up with. We've developed laws, we've developed policies, we've developed institutions, we've amended the constitution, and yet you seem to be, fully unable to really move this country forward. And maybe part of the reason why you're having these problems is that the Kenyan state, as we know it, was not negotiated. We were not part of the formation. We were not consulted. Our grandfathers and grandmothers were not consulted. We found ourselves in Kenya, and we were not part of the conversation of forming Kenya. And part of the reason why we are having this show today, and the panel that we have, is to try and ask the questions, those uncomfortable questions. For example, I'll give an example. If you look at the people who fought for independence in this country, the Mau Mau, you ask them what they were fighting for. The Mau Mau were known as the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. They were fighting for land and freedom. But what Kenya got was independence. The question is, who was fighting for independence? And what is independence? And independence from what? And so we were told Jomo Kenyatta is the father of the nation, the first president. And yet the Mau Mau who are fighting for land and freedom say that he was not one of them. But Jomo Kenyatta was said by the white man to have been the leader of the Mau Mau. What is the truth? What is the truth? And if Jomo Kenyatta was not part of the Mau Mau, yet he was portrayed as part of the Mau Mau to become the first president of Kenya, then is Kenya a lie? Those are the heavy questions you're going to try and engage with. They're not easy. They are no absolute answers, but we hope our panelists will help us be able to start engaging with this debate from a different point of view. You all took a survey when we started based on what you know, and we hope that you take another one at the end of this show to see whether there's anything that has changed in your understanding. And based on the fact that Kenya has got a constitution in 2010, and is called a transformative human rights-based constitution that was supposed to transform our governance from what we had at independence, which is a colonial state. Has that changed? So without much ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists who are seated among you. We'll start with, just introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Mtemi. And just as a quick introduction, my name is Philip Nyakundi Gichana. I'm a lawyer by profession and an anti-corruption activist. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip.
My name is Monaja. I'm an artist as well as a historian, and I'm privileged to be with all of you today.
Monaja is one of very unique Kenyan who studied history and used to teach history actually at university, and then he decided to become an artist, a recording artist. So maybe you tell us why.
Thank you, Mutemi. My name is Darius Okola. I'm a writer and a researcher focusing mostly on economic issues.
We have this gentleman here.
My name is William Odhiambo Ramogi. I am an economist. I am also from the private sector. I run a firm called Elium Capital. Beyond that, of course, I am also an activist, although I like to consider myself more of a patriot on matters of human rights, and in particular economic rights. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Odhiambo. And last but not least.
Hi, I'm Antonia Kihara, and I'm a strategist, innovation consultant, and my focus is on small trader change, economic change for small traders in Africa.
Thank you so much, Tonia. And I prefer calling Tonia a visionary, you know, but a lot of the panelists that have introduced themselves, patriots, they are Kenyans who care about Kenya. And they are not paid to care about Kenya. They do it on their own behalf. And they don't just care about Kenya, they are doing something somewhere to try and make our society a better place. So I want to ask this question, and each panelist will get to respond as we begin. What is corruption? From your understanding, what is corruption? What we call what we refer to as corruption? And what is the difference between corruption and bribery? What is bribery? I don't know who will respond first. Okay, go to me.
I really thought about this last night. I think corruption is a dysfunction, it's a disease, and it's a disconnection from who we are as humans, but also at a soul level. I think corruption is an idea that we're separate from a higher power, separate from a supreme being. And it's the symptom of that separation. I think that's what corruption is. And I think bribery is just that as well. It's just lack of power because we're not connected to our own power. So we have to be corrupt to get ahead.
Thank you, Tonia. Anyone else? Any of the panelists wants to take it?
Maybe just as a way of adding to what Tony has spoken, it is an interesting question when you ask what is corruption. And one of the challenges we've grappled with are the definitions that have been bundled. One example is the definition given by Transparency International that corruption is an abuse of power for private gain. So then this definition is what has mostly been used to determine what is corruption. I know it is not conclusive, and questions have come, like, especially in our mother tongues, how do we define corruption? Where I come from, there is no word like corruption. In fact, what we know is just theft, and there is nothing else. So in my own understanding, there is quite a challenge still as we try to figure out what the term corruption is and what does it encompass. When we talk about corruption, do we mean we talk about sextortion, what we've been talking about, the discrimination in terms of race, gender, and all that. Yeah.
Thank you, Philip. Anyone? Darius?
I think the word corruption has no particular definition or particular meaning. It is simply a word that is used to refer to certain acts within society that reflect on the violation of certain principles, certain laws, certain ideas and certain ways in which a society is supposed to properly function. But at another level, corruption is also a certain system, a certain way of doing things that ensures that those who choose to pretty much follow the laid down procedures and laws are not able to get what they want, whether we're talking about government services, whether we're talking about being able to get due process on the law, and in the many other facets of society that we occupy. So on one hand, it's a violation, and on the other hand, the legal system entrenched in a certain way to ensure that things do not work the way they're supposed to.
So it's going away from the norm, from what society agrees is the norm, losing ourselves, as Tony has said. And it can be in many different spheres of our existence. That's what I'm getting from you, Darius.
Exactly. And as a word, of course, what constitutes corruption varies for all of us, depending on the spaces that we occupy. It could mean extortion, as my colleague Ishan has mentioned. It could mean bribery. It could mean theft. It could mean there are at least 23 different words and acts within society that constitute what we call corruption. So it is a broad definition, basically a broad word to refer to all these different acts and acts of omission or commission that eventually distorts how a society is supposed to function, a healthy society is supposed to function.
So key is a healthy society.
I want to lean towards his description of corruption, because it's more of a description. Because on the face of it, corruption is just fraud by those in power. But then again, it has the legal aspects, it has the moral aspects, and it has the systemic aspects. So that if, for example, I am the head of, let's say, Kenya Pipeline, and a friend of mine is the head of Kenya Ports Authority, and my wife owns a company. If I give business to my wife in Kenya Pipeline, where I am the CEO, it is illegal. But if I call my friend in Kenya Power or in Kenya Ports Authority to give her that procurement opportunity, it is not illegal, but it is immoral. So that then you find that we have restricted the conversation around what is legal, but have not gone to the depth of it, which is what he called it, theft. It is theft. Nothing else but theft and greed, if we are to address it from a moral angle. Legally, of course, it is illegal to be corrupt. But then again, unluckily in Kenya, the law is relative to who is in power at any given time. If someone who is in power does not feel that this law is conducive, because we treat it as a long list of suggestions. I like this suggestion better. I don't like this one because it is interfering with business. We call corruption business. The systemic problem is that corruption is named with very nice flowery phrases like dealy, business, jackpot, chai. Who wouldn't like chai, especially if you're Kenyan? And so that then there is a systemic problem because corruption is a reflection of who we are as a society. And he has mentioned that there is a cultural aspect to it. There is a big systemic problem because it is not limited to those in power. It goes down all the way to even mwananchi wa kawaida like myself, who, when I need a passport and I'm told I have to wait 3 months to get an appointment to go to Nyayo House to get my passport, but if I wanted it in 2 days, I only have to talk nicely. Talk nicely. And so then the talking nicely, of course, means that currency will exchange hands, whether through the mobile phone or physically. And so it is a systemic problem that we have to address at the national level and at the individual level.
Thank you so much for that. Tonya, you want to interject? And then you go to Monaja.
Yeah, I think corruption is a mindset. It's the value system, that, it's the values that we process, make decision making. It's a mindset.
And on that note, what would you say is the genesis of that mindset or that value system? where did we get it from? Because 50 years ago as Africans, as Philip said, we don't even have the nomenclature. We didn't have those words in our languages, our African languages. So where did it come from?
I think corruption comes from a fear that there's not enough. And I think that was imported to us by the colonialists because they obviously felt that they didn't have enough. Otherwise, they wouldn't be coming to take what we have. So there's a corruption already there. There's a corruption. The first corruption is imagining that there wasn't enough. I don't think Africa was perfect in the past, but certainly the earth provides us with absolutely everything we need. In fact, I think of Africa as Eden. We had our water, we had our plants, we had everything. We didn't need to go anywhere to get anything. We had enough. But with the introduction of cash and work, and also when the colonialists came, they were living like kings and queens. So the people who were in power wanted to be like them. And to this day, I think everyone in this room has the challenge of materialism and wanting to be rich and wanting to have a lot of things and 5 cars and 50 shoes and just over the top. I mean, no one needs more than 5 shoes, really. Or 5 trousers or whatever. We want more than we can have. And so that's the disease. It's the idea that there isn't enough, that the universe is limited.
Capitalism?
We're limitless.
Capitalism, consumerism?
Capitalism, consumerism, that's all coming from this idea that there's not enough. It's not out of creativity, talent, purpose, serving others. And I think as capitalism has developed, it's become just about numbers in a really ridiculous way. It's just about how many billions, more billions. It's insatiable. But it comes from a place of believing that we don't have access to enough. Whereas I think if we look back to African spirituality, just breathing, just being a breathing soul means you have the power to attract actually everything you need. You don't have to be a slave for it. But I don't think we have that belief, and it was wiped out. Our religions were obviously wiped out, and we adopted Christianity. And even with Christianity, I mean, I think the first thing that we learned as Christians is that we're not enough. We're sinners. We were born bad. And we'll never know whether we're good or not until we die, right? So we're living in a constant state of anxiety. So there's so many things that happened, through colonialization, losing our spirituality and adopting new spirituality or new religions.
Would you say that the fact that you said we are born sinners, in quotes, and we die sinners, so we never know when we've done
we don't know if you're going to get to eternal heaven or eternal hell until you die. You won't know, right? Until you die. That's a lot of anxiety.
It's a lot of, so we are traumatized people as it is.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you're told to be man enough or woman enough. You need to wear a certain shoe, buy stuff, but buy a certain car, certain phone.
Yeah, and it's a lot of plastic. So when I look at, these businessmen who are obsessed with getting billions, I don't actually see success. I see fear. I see poverty, trauma. It's wanting so much. When it's fine to have desires, but when you want more than you can even eat, when you want 10 cars and you can't even drive them, a house with 20 rooms that you're not going to use, you're trying to fill something else. It's not even based on actual needs.
Spiritual emptiness?
The spiritual emptiness, yeah.
Thank you. We'll come back to that. Monaj, your thoughts?
Power is one of the central elements in the equation. I guess we focus on corruption from a state point of view. So we say, okay, corruption is the use of entrusted power for one's benefit at the public's cost. But if you look at lateral relations within society, just leave alone the state, leave alone the institutions of state, leave alone the interactions between state agencies and whatnot. If I were new to Nairobi and I wanted to go to Westlands, and then I meet someone and I'm like, Westi naweza fika Westi aje? Where is Westi? Kuja ndakuonyesha. Lakini si utanunua soda. So you wonder, like, that's a bribe, no? It's not necessarily illegal, but it's a bribe, again, from the moral perspective that Ramogi spoke about. And I think it has seeped into public life has seeped into, it's now a societal, not even just a state problem, but also a societal problem. And I lean towards Tonia's definition, like it's a dysfunction. But we also have to be aware of the nature of the state that we are in. You'd asked about the origins of corruption. So if we go back during the colonial days, or as colonial rule was being imposed on this land that is now called Kenya, you had chiefs who were used as intermediaries to rule, to impose the rule and to extract taxes, and they'd enrich themselves. But would you call that power of the chiefs entrusted power? It wasn't entrusted, it was a conquest state. These were just barons, like this chief, senior chief, is the one who's going to be used to recruit laborers for this place and so on and so forth, and taxes, and then he'd enrich himself. So I think also in our context, I think coercion is one of the things that goes almost hand in hand when you're talking about corruption in Kenya. Like, because the balance of forces of, I don't like, dichotomizing, good, bad, but the balance of forces of morality against immorality in this sense, in this context, you'd find more forces leaning towards the bad. And now coercion is what maintains graft, is what maintains corruption. And just look at the history of the whistleblowers. Just look at what happened to JM. Look at Ouko and Molasses plant. Look at Munyakei. Look at Gedongo. Look at recently the KQ guy, the guy who talked about the flights that were coming from China. About then again a week ago, was it the Mara heist, the guy from Mara University who exposed the whistleblower. And you look at the forces that are mobilized against such people. But I think we have to think through the contexts in which corruption came, and because we'd say, okay, high tolerance. Our society has a high tolerance for corruption, but where does that come from? It comes from the fist, coercion being used, and then with time you're like, okay, I'll just mind my business. Why should I? See, we can just, I don't want problems. Mi nataka tu kuishi. Like, you start going against MUYI and it's 80s and people are being taken to Nyaya House. Hey. So anyway, I guess that's what's responsible for that high social tolerance.
So basically you've just reframed what Tonya spoke about, that emptiness, that seeking more, but also the corruption in terms of our souls, our nature, our value systems. And I think I want us to take a step back from my introduction and ask ourselves, how did Kenya come to be? How did we end up being in Kenya? How did it start?
I think
Okay, come.
what we call Kenya right now is about 150 years old. That's around 1885. That's when a lot of these white people show up here, and then they establish themselves here. Come 1895, I think. Yeah, 1895, they come up with this. That's part of the East African Protectorate, of course, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, then what we now call these three countries. Then they come up with an Ordinance Act. That's in 1895. It's ratified in 1902. And this is basically saying, all lands, pretty much, any unoccupied land belongs to basically the authorities or the Queen. Now, the definition of unoccupied land is very convenient because for them, unoccupied land means if they decide you're not human enough to own this piece or dignified enough as a person, they can simply declare part of your land unoccupied land, and that makes it part of the state. And that is the first violation you actually see in our what we call now Kenya.
Yeah, just to come, just a clarification on that. Who really came? Who's doing this in 1918 something, 19 something?
What's interesting is that it's basically a bunch of thugs from London, from pretty much across this country.
And what were they running away from in their country?
A lot of them were. There's a very interesting thing that happens between a whole lot of history between 1492, when these people believe the world is theirs for the taking, and they start sending people, Vasco da Gama is in Malindi building, they go to Grenada, they do South America, all that conquistadors, all that, a lot of history there. But basically over the next 300 years, they go out there and pretty much take every city, every state, every land in the world, every resource that they could get their hands on. So by the time you're coming to 1885, it's, you have the Germans, you have partly the British, you have the Spanish, of course, going into South America. So it's mostly a lot of people moving away from Europe to come out here and take over a lot of these lands. So in Kenya, it's mostly a bunch of British communities.
It was actually a private company, huh?
Yeah, it is a private company. It's called the Imperial British East Africa. There's, of course, the Indian version of that. So Kenya actually starts as a company. It doesn't start as a country, And it's an extractive company owned by basically a few thugs, who ran from Millwall and Birmingham and London and settled here. And from there is when you begin to see this first extraction, because they first steal land, then they start building the railway. In 1902, they make it official that unoccupied land is, basically belongs to the authorities. That's how they started doing land grabbing. 1909, Roosevelt shows up here. He comes with the idea of conservation as we know it now, and basically that's what he was doing in the US. He settles here, he shoots a couple of elephants and giraffes. Well, he had lost the election, so he was just venting. So he came here to shoot all these animals. And by the time he leaves a bunch of his friends here. Of course, they take up more lands. That's actually the original idea behind this conservation.
So you're saying these are guys who, let's say in London, in the UK, US, could not get enough. They did not have, because already those people had already, everything belonged to mostly to some elite there. So they decided to step out of their countries to come and look for wealth and extract.
That's kind of steal.
To steal, yeah. We're using our polite word, extract.
We were caught up in our vernacular. Yeah. This is okay. It helps social conversations. But then you get to 1920s when they introduced the cash economy in Kenya, through the hard tax. Well, they'd introduced cash before. Remember, our societies weren't cash-based. We did our barter trade and all that. We had our own form of value and currency. They introduced cash, but then they realized Kenyans are not into how they were introducing this cash. Then they introduced the hard tax, which was basically saying, you can't trade if you don't have money. You can't have money if you're not working in the White Islands. Which means if you had your shamba and it was feeding you, suddenly you needed money. And the only way to get this money is to go work for Mzungu. So basically they were bullying you into going to work for them. Now you see how corruption is building. First of all, they've stolen land through the Ordinance Act. Now they've introduced the hard tax in 1920, which drags...
So someone comes from elsewhere, let me get this right, comes to my land, then tells me to start paying him taxes.
First of all, they steal part of your land.
Yeah.
And then they want you to come and work for them by force, so they can tax you, and that's how you make money to live. It's all shades of messed up.
There's something you wanted to say, and I think this is connecting with the emptiness and the spiritual.
About, I was researching the Kikuyu pots, clay pots that Kikuyus used to cook with. Apparently they used to get them from the river. And there was nutrients, so I encourage all of you to try and get clay pots to cook with, but there would be nutrients and minerals in the pots that would be released as you cooked the food. But now, when the railways were happening and stuff, in Karatina Nyeri, there were some missionaries, some Italian Catholic missionaries, who came and told the women that they have to serve God properly. They had a course, like a program, of how to serve God in your home and how to serve God in your kitchen. And they told them they have to get the aluminium pots from the Indian shop. And that Indian was only making aluminium pots because they'd finished making the railway and they already had these machines and metalworks and they needed something to do. So the Catholic nuns convinced the Kikuyu women that in order to serve God, they needed to get the aluminium pot. And then now they didn't have the cash to get the aluminium pot, so they needed to force their husbands to go to work to get the cash to get the aluminium pot. I mean, that just makes me so angry. Talk about coercion. I wanted to say talk about coercion. They were coerced.
So they
were
created
pressured,
systems that forced people
and they were told
into
it was
labor.
about honoring God and being holy. Yeah. But really it was about buying aluminium pots and making the Indians have something to do.
That's basically long and short of it. You're dragged into the cash economy, and from there, then you become welded to the system, you become welded into the cash economy, you need this money that they are the ones paying you with to be able to build this space. And all the way through, by the time you're coming to the independence, or what we call independence in 63, the system becomes entrenched in certain ways. Of course, it throws a little favors here and there to the natives, but it's essentially entrenched in a certain way that it's supposed to basically benefit certain elites. And that's why when I say part of the definition of corruption is a system that is built in a certain way that works for certain clusters of the population at the top, but eventually coerces the people below it to be able to violate certain principles and laws and rules in order to still be able to serve that system. So it's a system deliberately designed to be able to work in a certain way.
It's a system designed to steal and take the money from the masses and put it in the pockets of a few.
Yeah.
That's how Kenya was created.
That's basically how
Yeah? Yeah.
The black.
Yeah, just before you come to you, before you come to me. So we are, Kenya was created to do what? To loot and put in the hands of a few. And let me give you examples as we move to Odhiambo. If you look at the top people in this country in terms of political leadership, who are they? What is the common denominator? The better a thief you are, the higher you rise. The president is the son of the biggest thief. The deputy president is a thief and a murderer. Former governor of Nairobi was, former governor of Kiambu was, governor of Mombasa is, take it away.
Thank you. Now I know why you are comfortable around jails in Nairobi. On a light note, I want to start this conversation where Darius left it in the 60s, or should I say in the 50s, where the independence movement starts. In principle, the independence movement was not just an African idea. I think the powers that were in Europe realized it was unsustainable to manage all these countries. And so there was need to let go of the countries, give them independence, but still make sure that the benefits, the economic benefits that they were getting from these countries are still coming through. And so the independence movements were to be quote unquote guided, nurtured, even trained, so that the resultant nations that come out of these protectorates are favorable to the establishment somewhere in London. And so that is where now you hear stories of picking up someone who was not part of the movement and planting that someone. I am not comfortable around jails in Nairobi. And then now having that someone become the hero.
I can say it for you.
Thank you. The hero and the champion of an independence movement that he was not part of, nor did he believe in. And so now, come 1963, when power is being handed over, they are comfortable because they know who they are handing it over to. And so they hand it over. Now notice that there were talks, ideas around Majimboism, which is decentralized power. And so that the kind of power system we wanted is there is a presidency that ensures security, but in terms of resources, there is some sort of division so that then resources are not centralized. Because you see, when you centralize resources, in principle, you are just impoverishing those who are not within the center of power. And that is what happened between 1963 and 2010 when we enacted the new constitution. or actually in 2013 when actually we started getting resources to the ground. And so you find that when these new guys came into power, what you saw is that they stole land, lots of land. Some of them on around 20%. Wait a minute, if you put these collaborators together and you just did an audit of how much land these guys own alone, without anybody else, I'm sure they own at least half of this country. Just them and their wives and their children and grandchildren, no one else. And so they stole land, they stole resources. There was land that was supposed to be given to Mau Mau, those who fought for Mau veterans. Those guys walipigwa bafu. They never saw it coming. Men like Bildad Kagia suffered. And even Ramogi, Chingoneko, he suffered. And so, because they were not close to power, people like Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who was bold enough around the jails of Nairobi like Mutemi, came up with an idea that there is not yet Uhuru, and he suffered for it. Because he was not sure he wanted to steal land. If you go to Bondo today, he owns only his ancestral land. And God bless his soul. Now the challenge is, we as a nation are not woke to realize that those in power are actually extracting from us. So that we are following through with the script that was done in Berlin Conference in 1884, the script that was done in London in the 1950s when they were shepherding the independence movement. We are still following through with this, and so you hear things like Udhamaki. What is Udhamaki? Udhamaki is a system that let us ensure that power is concentrated at the center, so that it doesn't matter if Lamu is impoverished, it doesn't matter if large tracts of land are being taken by people in government in Lamu merely because of Lapset. It doesn't matter if Mombasa as a whole city is impoverished so that one family can benefit. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they die. It doesn't matter if in an election we can steal an election and people die. You know, you have to break a few eggs when making an omelette. And these are Otienos and Umondis that are dying and they are being called eggs. And so it's a sad situation. For me, Mutemi, it's not so much about 1884. It's so much about 2021. What am I doing? What are you doing? And what are we doing as a nation to create that awakeness? Now you are taking me back to where we were as a company. In 1884 or 85, as Darius has shared, we were a company, a British company. But I do not want to believe that we are still there. There is some progress that we have made as a nation that we must recognize. That today I can easily interact very closely with Anjeri. I would not do so if I was born somewhere in Siaya in 1881. And perhaps I'll not even meet Anjeri and produce a baby that is both Luo and Kikuyu. And so, but now we can. As a people we are, and everybody has said this, the problem is not the people. The problem is the leaders. They are using our heritage, our ancestry, wrongly to mobilize and to ensure that they protect that Udhamaki. And I'll prove it to you. In Ethiopia, they never had colonization. And I'm finishing. They never had colonization, but they still use the tribe to mobilize, to ensure that they stay in power. You see the Tigray guys being set aside so that the Amharic can now rule Ethiopia properly because their biggest threat is Tigray. And so this is a problem in Africa, that we use our heritage, which is God-given and which is a blessing we have, wrongly to mobilize people to protect thieves so that they can remain in power. I refuse to agree that we are not a nation. We are a nation. We just need to kick out some people and we'll be okay.
I guess corruption is emblematic of a larger systemic problem, which is colonial capitalism. that has been perpetuated for the past 6 or so decades. I mean, after what preceded it. And I think 3 things that has made that system thrive, that has made corruption, which of course, again, the symptom of colonial capitalism. I think one, the fact that we had...
So you're saying we're still a colony?
More or less.
Okay, go ahead.
I think the fact that we had a centralized political system putting, as what they call the imperial powers of the presidency, and the person who occupied that office did not have the moral backbone and really the vision of thinking 30 years from now, this country is going to be here. I'm going to leave it. And the way I'm going to lead, the way I'm going to govern, there's some sort of implications of life then. As Ramogi has talked about, there was some money that was set aside to settle landless people. Of course, Kenya took a loan from the United Kingdom. But when the manifestation of corruption, sometimes you just ask yourself, how is it that some person who was released from detention in 1961, in less than 2 years had about 3 high-quality cars? 3 high-quality cars. Another 3 years, the guy has bought a car worth £10,000, and his salary is £7,500 per annum. You can add allowances of about £6,000. And there's some question marks. So from the get-go, if you have the person who has been entrusted with that power, that with time will seep into public life, his friends. And the way power works in such a system is that there are mini presidents. There's a chief who's a mini president in that sense, because he's the one who controls the location. There's a DO, there's a DC. And you just say, okay, fine, if that guy is doing that, si mi pia mimi, sinifanye pia hivyo. And so the second thing I'd say
so this system is replicated from the presidency to the village.
Yes, patrimonialism. Power comes from the top, but below the president as a mini president, the vice chancellor is a president. Like when you think about it, the DO is the county commissioner is so you have mini representations of that bigger power. And whatever that person is doing is going to be reflected here. And perhaps borrowing from someone like Nyerere, he had some idea of morality. If you look at Tanzania and Kenya, and I know sometimes it's problematic drawing comparisons between 2 countries, but you look at what came out in 1967, Arusha Declaration. This is someone who said, as a policy.
Because of time, could we pick that up? So we need to go for a break, and we pick that up so that we go into the next section in terms of how do we move forward, and then Philip will also give us his view from a structural point of view, and also because he's a lawyer, advocate, how these systems are built into the things that we do, and then you can pick it up from there. So thank you so much. I think time moves so fast when you're having fun. Are we all having fun? Yes. Are we learning? Yes. Thank you. And you're back. Thank you, everyone. We hope you are refreshed. We want to pick up the conversation where we had left it. It was quite heavy. We will come back to Monaj towards the end as we ask, how can we move this narrative forward? How can we start working on changing the situation that you're in? But before we do that, we're going to get you guys more involved, the audience. We want you to either comment or ask your questions. And as you go there, let me request Philip to contribute to the debate where we left it.
Thank you very much, Mtemi. Just to follow the discussion and what my fellow panelists have spoken about, just to highlight maybe 2 things. One, that this corruption issue was a colonialist problem that came with them. And just to highlight a few things, and what comes in my mind when I read some history backwards, I'm told that the first reported corruption case was involving the Kenya-Uganda Railways case, an issue to do with oil and all that stuff. The second one, and most pronounced, and this is, I think, something interesting, was the issue to do with the Mbotela estate that was being built then. And what happened, there was a lot of pilferage of public funds, and they decided to investigate that. The then city engineer, after the investigations were complete,
is this during colonialism? Or
yes, colonialism, okay, during that time. So when it was discovered that he was actually culpable, he decided to take his life. So it was called somebody Harold Whip somebody. But just to note that while these people came, there is an interesting thing that we learn, that how they stayed in this country. We know about the Happy Valley, how they used to do the parties, how they would say that you would go there, drink a nice gin, and wake up with somebody's wife the next day. And it used to be something very normal. So then there are two things that have been highlighted: the way they took the land and what they left, the impact that they left on our Africans. So that even as you were left, you were told, you had to understand that if you're not living the good life, then you're living no life. So that's why we had people immediately after the colonialists
left. That's the emptiness.
The emptiness, exactly. So when they left that, and then of course the issue of land was central at that point. So they had to live in places like Karen, the Mudaigas, and all this. And we've seen how, over time, it looks very bad to say that you live in Eastlands.
So to make it, even for Africans who are told,
yes,
is to live in Mudaiga.
Yeah. If you have made it, you have to live in Mudaiga. And how do you make it? Because the system is designed in a way that you have to play by its books. So then you have to do what they had, the way the system had been designed. Just to say that land, over time, the issue of land, when we used to talk about the corruption just before the 80s, it is predominantly about land. But at some point, these things changed. In the 80s, we started talking about corruption when we started understanding now the money value and how that system has got entrenched into us. We started talking about the Golden Bag scandals. We started talking about money that is funding the elections and everything, and how these public officials come into being. I think I'd want to leave it as such and maybe discuss later the solutions that are related to that and how it has evolved over time.
So what I'm getting from me is that if we started with the fact that the system was designed like this to steal. And then that was a colonial system. Odhiambo told us that the system learned, as the Kenya was getting independence, in quotes, it learned to train some Kenyans to represent it here in Kenya. So the white man withdrew to London, but left people doing their bidding here in Kenya, isn't it? Would we say, even like, Tony, as you pick this conversation, maybe the education system that was designed then, the alliances, the mangus, all these schools, were they, meant to identify Africans who could then go be trained in those schools, be taken to London School of Economics, Oxford, and wherever, and then come back to do what the Mzungu wanted on their behalf? I don't know.
Yeah, I really loved what he was saying about coercion. This whole thing has been a coercion the whole way. Education, I'm an example of an English education that was designed to make me not be African. And even when you talk about things like the London School of Economics, the principles of the London School of Economics, I mean, banking crashes every 80 years, but we still go with it. So all of the black people who took over were trained to take over with a new system. And then when it comes to laws and trade, I really like the fact that we were saying Kenya was a business. It was set up as a business, and I think it still is. If you look at the supermarket shelves, it's all foreign products. And if you look at the laws, they're all in support of the foreign products. So we are still colonialized. We're still colonialized.
Odhiambo, do you want to take it? And also talk about which companies get what tenders? I know you have sued Kenya Ports Authority at some point.
I'll be kind. The law stops me from discussing my actions, just mentioning that I have. We won the case sometime last year, and the government has appealed to the courts that what we were given should not be. We are hoping that the appeal will come through. But that mentioned, I love the conversation, but I wanted to bring something else, which is the relationship between debt and corruption. Because you find that you said something very important, that we got a loan from the UK so that the landless can be settled. And then this loan somehow went into settling the very powerful. And this culture has continued to date, that we get loans, and this is the best, the safest, and the most efficient way of stealing our resources. Let me say that Eurobond 1 was the investors' money that was borrowed to make us much better infrastructure. That money never went into infrastructure. And of course, the likes of Devin D complained that that money cannot be traced. Eurobond 2 was people in government using Eurobond 1 money to lend to the government of Kenya. So that even when they are out of power, we can still pay them just for being nice people in government. So Eurobond 2 is not some investor somewhere. It is just our guys here with nice companies, flowery companies, that we are going to pay for the next 10 or so years.
So we steal Eurobond 1. I steal Eurobond 1.
Yes.
And then I now
lend
it
to the government of
as
Kenya.
Eurobond 2.
Yes, as Eurobond 2. Significantly so, there is also significant evidence to allude to the fact that the money we got from China, part of it was given to us by some people in government. This is why this Chinese deal around SGR is a very sensitive subject, because these people want that even when they are out of power, you will still be endeared to them, paying them. They actually just need to wake up. And when they wake up, you have paid them for waking up, just like that. And it is stolen money that you're paying them to wake up to. And so then you find that there is a very strong link between debt and corruption in Africa. So that our focus, even as a country today, should be how can we control debt as a country, so that then it is not an open way of someone just borrowing money, because the challenge of debt is managing it, or rather accounting for it, is complicated. So they take advantage of that complex mechanism to steal.
So we can say Kenya was created as a company to extract, to remove from the pockets of the people and put it in the hands of a few. We got independence, and they designed a system whereby our own Kenyans could now continue with the extractions on behalf of the same colonialists, but they get something on the side. And debt is now the way you extract today.
Absolutely. It is, there is a power sharing formula between the former colonialists and the current colonialists, because the former colonialists, it's old money. They are the guys who own Magadi soda company. They are the guys who own Unilever. They are the guys, Del Monte. They are the guys who own these Kericho tea farms.
There was a, sorry to interrupt. There was a law, there was a deal that was done with the UK for 25 years for some companies not to pay tax for 25 years.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is this conservancy that in fact is actually just looking for oil and minerals, but now are called conservancies because really they are interested in your resources. And then there is new money. The new money are the guys who now borrow from the government of Kenya, and then they lend the government of Kenya, and then they are paid nicely at very expensive rates. There's the guys with the new money are now the guys who own the milk companies and tell you you do not have the permission to sell milk. You have a cow, it produces milk, but you cannot sell it until someone somewhere says so. They tell you that you should not have honey. You should not have a, what do you call this thing? A beehive, until you tell them.
It is not branded.
Yes, until you tell them that you wanted to have honey, as if now you should consult them when you want to bring nyuki into your compound. It's very complicated. They are putting in place laws and measures to ensure that they lock out the normal mwananchi from the businesses they are doing. It's
Independent power producers?
Independent power producers. Ironically, you've mentioned that. You know, we produce more power than we consume in the Republic of Kenya. We produce more power than we consume. But power is still expensive, and it is pushing away companies from Kenya because of some guys called independent power producers. For example, Kenyan produces power and sells to Kenya Power at 2 shillings per unit. These guys produce power. Actually, some of them, they don't even produce power. They buy it from Kenyan, sell it to Kenya Power at 21 shillings. So that they are making a killing, about 19 shillings per unit, merely for being well connected. They have done zero work. Again, they just woke up and they remembered that their name is well connected, and they got 19 shillings per unit that Ramogi consumed. And Ramogi has to pay them because, of course, they are the powers that be. It's unfortunate, but this is the reality of where we are today. If you look at the berth, the port of Mombasa, one of the strategic berths is being taken by one family. And that one family made sure that these other families in Mombasa that are well-to-do have been given also something. Just kate. You know, shika hii, kula hii, wacha maneno mengi. Na unatulia. And so it's a systemic problem where we are, where companies are owned by people in government. I really wish that law that was proposed, I think it was by Andungu, that guys in government should not do business. I really wished it passed. But then again, that is wishful thinking. Now it's what we need to do that matters.
Tonya, you work with small-scale farmers. How does that reflect in the work that you do?
Small-scale farmers, basically their lives have not changed since we got independence. They're still getting paid what they were getting in colonial times. And a lot of the laws around farming, they're just getting crazier and crazier. You can't sell milk to your neighbor. It's illegal now. I think it's 500,000 fine if you sell milk to your neighbor. Recently, there was something about beehives, and you have to, buy a certain beehive only from China. So this corruption for the small-scale farmers, they have never been free. There's definitely not yet Uhuru. And they're small, and they don't understand the law, and they don't understand the acts and the Seed Variety Acts, and there's so many laws coming out every single day, they can hardly interpret them, they don't know where to find them. But what's happening in food is it's basically we've sold out our food, and I think that's what makes us really poor, to the West. And all the laws, I think you can talk more about the laws, are designed to keep Africans as the slaves and the neo-colonialists as the people earning the money. It's a business. And I think they only make their billions because of the slavery setup. I think if people were getting paid fairly, then maybe they wouldn't be making the billions.
The old money Ramogi spoke about was created, for example, if it's money that was created from 1400s, as Darius told us, up to around 18 something. That was the time of slavery, isn't it? Yeah. So the money, the sugarcane and opium and all these other things was extraction through slavery, free labor. And I think what you're saying is that even the economic setup today continues ensuring that the farmers earn just enough to keep doing this, but not enough to liberate them from slavery.
Yeah, they don't earn enough to live, and they don't even earn enough to consume their own products. Coffee farmers don't know what coffee's like. They can't afford it, which is ridiculous.
tea farmers cannot buy tea from the factory, the best quality tea.
They can't.
The Ketepa tea we use in Kenya, most of us, it's the lowest quality of tea. Yet we are tea producers.
But I want to say something else about food while I have the opportunity, that is that just like the neo-colonialists got coerced into capitalism and materialism, Kenyans have also gotten coerced into wanting to be Western. So we also don't want to buy our own products, and that's a big challenge. You know,
sorry, just really, I wanted to say something about that.
The supermarket is full of foreign products, and I think I calculated once that Africans give out 7 billion shillings a day this is the poorest guy, the Mujengo man who buys something, out of Africa. So we're not actually poor if we can afford to do that, right? We just don't have the confidence to send it in the direction of ourselves. So we're also mentally enslaved.
If for 6 decades Kenya has been looted and it has not collapsed, that means you're very wealthy, isn't it?
Yeah, we are. But we're also mentally enslaved. And actually, when I look at small-scale farmers, I also do feel like they're a little bit mentally enslaved, because they work for absolutely nothing. And actually, coffee farmers are beginning to say, you know what, we're not going to grow coffee anymore, we're going to grow tomatoes. And I think that's great. That's like a sign of self-esteem.
Yeah, I wanted to say, you know, there's a lot to say about especially agriculture in this country. We comfortably buy maize more expensively in Mexico and Brazil, from Mexico and Brazil, and we bring it here. And we have not subsidized the Kenyan farmer. So that then you find that the Kenyan maize, quote unquote, is said to be more expensive than the Brazilian one. But you know, the Brazilian one is subsidized by their government, and even then, when we buy it from there, or when they buy it from there, they sell it to the Kenyan government very expensively. And that's a very long conversation. Until last year, I think it's the coffee sector, that you, as an individual farmer, cannot do with your coffee what you want. You have to sell it to specific people, and then specific marketers have to take it abroad, which I found to be very colonial in its infrastructure. And so the farming issue in this country really needs to be addressed. We said that food security is an issue. It's an issue in terms of, yes, the systems, the market systems need to be harmonized and realigned properly. But on the other hand, also, there's a lot of unsafe food that is coming into this country that we need to really address. We are importing too much, and yet we can actually produce enough food that can satisfy this country. The agricultural sector is made to be inefficient, is made to be unproductive, is made to look bad, so that people can import food from wherever cheaply.
Is that corruption?
It is. Because unfortunately, our politicians don't like to invest and let something grow. Look, if, for example, you stole 1 billion shillings and you invested it and it grew into a 10 billion company, and then this money somehow created employment and was circulating here, maybe we can overlook your sins and maybe say you are forgiven in the name of that one. But you see, the challenge is this guy is still. And then they take this money to China, they take this money to Sydney, they take this money to the UK, to the US, so that it is not doing anything here. And they only bring it when they need to bribe our mothers with 500 shillings and 1 unga to vote. So that then now this money is circulating elsewhere. So our agriculture, I don't think that we are wired to buy foreign things. Personally, I would enjoy nduma, I would enjoy sweet potatoes more. Perhaps this is why I'm bigger than most. But the challenge is the market systems don't favor that. It is designed an infrastructure that only favors the imported goods, and they are more expensive. So that then you find that the local farmer is disempowered intentionally, so that his goods do not reach Nairobi the way it should. In the middle, there are cops that are trying to ensure that his good, by the time his good reaches Nairobi, it is more expensive than just a loaf of bread, which I am buying from someone who is well connected.
Okay, I think 2 or 3 pertinent issues. One of them is especially issue of fuel and electricity. In Kenya, electricity, we buy it at 18 shillings per kilowatt hour, you know. In comparison, in China, they buy it at 3 shillings per kilowatt hour. I think it should be like 9 shillings in Tanzania. It should be around 6 shillings in Egypt. It should be around 14 shillings, if I'm not wrong, in South Africa. And this is simply because, as you had mentioned, the independent power producers were, able to basically skew the system in such a way that it's so expensive to pretty much do or produce anything here. You can imagine if you are paying 18 shillings as part of your production costs, and the Chinese guy out there, Chinese lady is paying 3 shillings. By the time you're even producing your goods, you can imagine how much cumulative costs you already have just to produce what you produce. You can't even compete with them, at a global market or even at a local market, because the products will get here minus the amount of costs, basically 15 shillings for every kilowatt hour that you incurred. It's less for them. Now, look at fuel, for example. I mean, fuel gets here to what, around 38 shillings per liter? By the time it gets to Nairobi, it's what, right now we're running about to 120. Yeah. Now, we pay almost 80, 90 shillings in taxes and levies for a liter of fuel, basically, which is ridiculous. We have about 6 levies and 2 taxes in it. Yeah. So we have there are about 6 levies, and then there's a tax in there. Then there's another charge, I can't remember its name, but they're about basically 7 different costs added to fuel between Mombasa and Nairobi that makes it move from 38, 40 shillings. By the time it gets here, it's 120, 130 something. Now you can imagine, pretty much. Yeah, now you can imagine importing that, and fuel costs cover everything, pretty much every goods you're buying, warehousing, people are charged for that. Pretty much fuel runs everything in the economy. And when you're paying that amount of taxes on your fuel and on your electricity, you basically can't compete, You can't even produce. I mean, by the time you've covered your fuel costs, whatever you're trying to do to keep everything here running, you're already paying way more than, a lot of your contemporaries across the world, basically. And that's a very, very critical part of our conversation in terms of trying to get this country back to a place where your farmers are able to produce things cheaply, because if they're paying that cost, fuel cost goes into fuel, it goes into the seeds, it goes into pretty much every cost they have, such that the cost of production of the agricultural produce is so high, they can't even compete in this market. The second thing would be on debt, as you mentioned. Now, I mean, those numbers sometimes look big, when you're talking about the size of, the size of the Kenyan economy is about 10, 12 trillion, big numbers, But when you think about it, the national government owes about 7 trillion shillings. Parastatals owe about 3 trillion shillings. So basically, our national debt pretty much covers all the productivity in this country. If we were to be asked for all the monies today, we pretty much would run at zero.
What I'm hearing from you is that we produce, and then all that goes to paying some debt.
Our debt is equivalent to the size of our economy, basically.
So the extraction is everything.
Yeah.
And you're left with nothing.
Yeah, basically. And when you think about it, they're still borrowing by the day. And a lot of it goes into a lot of really unproductive stuff, because this is a labor-intensive economy. We are a very young country.
Is it mismanagement, or is it designed into the system?
It's designed into the system, and it's designed in such a way that ensures that this money doesn't go into the most productive space of the society. I mean, when you look at this country, the average Kenyan is 19.7 years. When you're investing in SGR, that is the equivalent, and David Ndii, the economist, has run these numbers, it's the equivalent of educating about 300,000 Kenyans for free, Now, when you think about the fact that as a country, you've only, since in the last 60 years, you've only taken about 900,000 people through university. Can you imagine if you forfeited building SGR and said, what, for the next 4 years, you're going to use this money to increase the number of people we train, would have added that number by 25%, straight up.
SGR cost about 320 billion.
That's the first phase, actually. Yeah.
And at that time, we were losing about 300 billion
actually
by
600,
corruption. Yeah. So we could actually have built the SGR without borrowing.
Which you didn't even need in the first place. You see, as I said, this is a very labor-intensive economy. You want to put your money in spaces where, first of all, you're training a lot of young people, you're taking them to college, you're giving them all these skills. You're investing in agriculture, which is labor-intensive. You want to take your money to spaces where people are. And Kenyans are not in that huge capital spending kind of model. It's not even sustainable for this economy.
Hold that thought and hold your third point. Let's allow, anyone who has a comment or a question from the audience? Okay.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Barack Omondi. And to start, I want to start with that name, that one, down there, Kenya. How did you even end up with the name Kenya from a British protectorate? Does the word Kenya is in relation to Kenyatta or the Kenyatta's family? How? I wish the historian could have time to explain. Or maybe already we are having two countries in Africa that are struggling to change their name. Maybe maybe because of time I might not mention the story, because they are thinking that the name that they currently have is not what they should be having in the fifth generation that we are in. And maybe Kenya should also take the same route.
So you're saying we should reimagine what to call ourselves?
Yeah, we should reimagine. Maybe come up with another name. Maybe we are the same system that we have started. It's what we continue to live. Okay. And again, I love it that we have an historian who later changed to an artist. I also had a problem with history. How could I imagine that we had Mount Kenya and all along to wait for John Ludwig Craft to come and discover that Kenya has Mount Kenya? The problem of Kenya, the problem of Kenya, maybe there's this quote that we usually have that choices has got consequences. I wish we could also expand on that, because the economic coon that we are in today, we are suffering because our leaders, and we know even the African leaders that have tried to work independently, from the system, the colonial, are being brought down even today. If Kenya had tried to move from west to east, and already we are suffering the consequences, and how I wish we can come up with a system that can make us more independent. Thank you.
What I've heard from you is not actually a question, it's a comment. And there's a question I keep asking. How come we got independence and we still maintain the same borders that the colonialists had created? How does that make sense? What did you get independence from if you're still bound by the same boundaries? Any other person? Okay. Thank you.
My name is Joshua Mamwaka. Thank you for this opportunity. I also work with farmers, and it's really, as much as we like to say the colonialist is the root of our problem, and I know historically the oppression has been happening for years and years and years. So it will take a long time to undo the oppression. You find like uniting farmers is very difficult. Telling people to come together and work together is very difficult. It's like we are our own enemies. So as much as we talk about, I think we're giving, in 2021, we are giving too much credit to the imperialists. We need to do some soul searching, look into ourselves, and find out what is the problem. And find out what is the problem, especially with us. Not to push blame, shift blame, because you find for one farmer to work with another, to rent a lorry, it's very difficult. For, let's say if I sell something, for a farmer to buy something from me, or even someone in the audience space to buy something from an African, is a big challenge. So if we came together and we united, I'm sure most of these challenges, we will be able to solve them. But
so capitalism says it's me, me, me.
Individualism, yes.
What you're describing is socialism.
Yeah, so it's not even...
No, of course you avoid the isms, but ideally it's...
So it's more of, we need to look into ourselves and be patriotic. And maybe the reasons we're not patriotic, we've discussed the boundaries, the false boundaries, and the divisions amongst us.
Your prescription
Yeah.
is that we will solve our problems if we come together and pool our resources.
And work together, and let's say like the food we are buying from abroad, we can buy here. If it's transport, we can transport our produce together.
Instead of me hiring my own truck alone.
Yeah, alone, yeah. You can hire a trailer. Yes, but to get an African to work with another African is almost impossible. There's the self-hate, you don't want another person to grow. Yet when one person grows, let's say if you buy a truck today, we can use the same truck as a village to transport our produce, but the African mindset is to keep your neighbor down.
Yet 50 years ago, we were saying we had Utu and we had African, we used to work together as a community. Yes. So what changed and what can we do?
Yeah, so as I wind up, my point is, I know we are looking at the past to see how we got here, but we need to also stop a lot of blaming of the white and the Chinese. We now need to look into ourselves, ask what is wrong with ourselves, and find out ways we can work together and work together, not just to blame the white person. Thank you.
Actually, that's what, that's what you're doing. Actually, what you're doing is, what we say is that if you don't know where you're coming from, then you won't know where you're going, your destination. So this is just a reflection. It's not so much a blame game. It's just grounding. This is where we came from, why we are here, and now how do we move forward.
My name is Christine Dhambi, and I wanted to, whatever I'll say, I'll direct it to the lawyer to comment something about it. Yes, so I was asking, as a country, will we be able to recover all the resources that have been lost to corruption and get the justice that we need? As in, you see, those people who are involved in crime, in corruption, most of them are not held to book. And those who are brought to book, ni kama umekosana na mkubwa. So I would like you to comment something about that.
One, I'd like to say this. It's unfortunate that our systems have been, again, as I say, just designed to fail. There is no reason why somebody who looted Kenya during the Goldenberg scandal, up to date, has never been arrested. It is mind-boggling that it takes all these years just to do that. And then you see the other aspect that is involved. Apart from the prosecution, the main aspect that we have failed as a country is asset recovery. Of course, there are quite a number of issues that are involved with asset recovery, but just in a conclusion is to say, for example, if you're prosecuted, criminal prosecutions, most likely the state can recover something. But if it is civil prosecution, I mean, and normally that is what happens when they want to institute civil proceedings to recover whatever the state has lost, it is completely impossible. Maybe in terms of the conclusion and recommendations that I will make, maybe I'll make some suggestions towards that. But for now, I'll tell you for free that we are not likely to recover. That's why people bring up these proposals, as they say, let us do amnesty, like let us give amnesty. But the structure of giving amnesty is that you have to confess that this and this happened, I stole this and this over the years, I've made this and this amount of the profit from it, and then the state can now decide how much are you going to give as to give back to the public coffers in return for a pardon from the state. So we have a lot of challenges, but in a summary, we are not going to recover any. Like the fraction that we are recovering and is being reported yearly is way too low. So we're not likely to get there.
So if that's what your comment, then I think we are way too far from fighting corruption.
Are we fighting corruption? Tonya, you wanted to say something? Are we fighting corruption?
No, just in the way of fighting corruption. The discussion is there that we are fighting corruption. How?
I was going to say about the laws. the laws. So we first we were African. They came, they set up a business, they changed our religion, they changed our culture, but they also gave us systems of which to work with. So all those early African leaders, they were taken to England, isn't it, to study and to understand the law. All of these African leaders, to come back to ensure that that extraction and that trade continued, even if they were giving us so-called independence. So I think we also need to have a mindset shift, or we need to create a new structure, a new legal structure. I don't know if that's possible, because a lot of the laws and even the education, so we need to stop looking at MIT, Harvard, Stanford, all these LSE experts in economics, experts in how to govern ourselves. They're very capitalist. The only purpose seems to be to make more money, make more profits, which is not sustainable for society, for a community. So I think we also need to unlearn everything that we thought was progressive, was forward-thinking.
Maybe start reset, start afresh, start a conversation like...
Yeah, and I think maybe the best way is to go back into our history and look at how did we organize for trade, how did we organize for community, how did we organize for employment, what was employment about. We need to go back. I don't think we can obviously go back because we've modernized and now we have cars and jobs and whatever. We can't quite go back, but we can...
There are systems you can borrow from the past.
We can borrow from the past, but I think we need to agree that the systems that are currently in place are designed to continue business. That's it. The same mission that was for the East Africa business. All the education, all the laws, all the policies, all the structures are set up for that business to continue, and it's definitely not in our favor.
Two things. One is I totally agree with the notion that you've alluded to, which is need to re-educate. And this has two roles. One is just the educational system. For some reason, this government is very keen on controlling our education. A few years back, they started failing kids in school so that kids are getting D+, C-, and some of us were celebrating at wamepatikana. But you know, they are intentionally failing them so that they don't go to the university, so that at the end of the day, there is a very small clique of highly educated people, and the rest of you just do what you're told. There's something that happens when you go to the university, even if the content of training is different, the interaction with very sharp minds has a way of just making you challenge the status quo. They don't want that. They want you to go to TVET, they want you to do what you are told, and just be a carpenter and a plumber, as Magoha says. And this is worrying for me, that the government has a train of thought as to what kind of education they want, and they don't want us to talk about it. I think we need to re-educate in terms of values, in terms of the technical courses that we are giving, in terms of our history. We need to re-evaluate and give better education. But at the same time...
Yes, we talk about scrapping history, teaching history.
No, we cannot do that. It's illegal, it's an abomination. We have to know where we are coming from before we can know where we are going. That I do not agree to. But the second thing that I am also concerned about is that the media is more interested in hype, the kind of speeches that Babu Owino give, the kind of speeches that Sonko give, the hype around it, the hype around going to Naivasha over the weekend. And there's very little content in terms of really educating the public about the real issues, about debt, about farming and the problems with the market system.
Is it possible the Subarus about Naivasha were to cover up the fact that the safari rally was going to run in the Kenyatta farm in Naivasha?
I wish they brought that instead of the Subarus. Let the Subaru boys be, but let us, address us on matters.
Because when you talk about Subarus, then you don't talk about why Naivasha, why in that space?
Absolutely. So I think the media has failed us in terms of educating the public on pertinent, important national issues that we have that we need to address. And so I think there's still need for that mind shift. And as regards, I'm finishing also, as regards what is brought up about the nation, the nation building,
I strongly believe we are a nation, because my definition of a nation is a society that has agreed to be governed together with a set of laws that they have agreed upon. And we have done that through the 2010 Constitution. Before that, I'm not sure, but now we have done that. But now the challenge is the people we have entrusted with this system are the problem. Because now we are interacting as a society, but these guys always want to divide us.
The guys from the past.
Absolutely. They are the ones managing the present, which we should not allow. And so for me, we are a nation, but we need to get rid of these foreign elements that are governing us.
Just a comment. The media is also part of the systems like the law and the education towards this colonialist system. The media is part of it.
One of the biggest ways we can go about some of these, especially dealing with the issue of corruption, is a whole lot more Kenyans need to step into the spaces where some of these decisions are made. The public participation, so they're making these policies. When they're drafting financial plans in your local counties, because they're always in the newspaper saying, this week they'll be at hall XYZ where they go to discuss. Please show up for those meetings. It's one of the critical ways in which you're able to get stuff done, especially within our localities, our wards, our counties, our constituencies. They may seem like, the issues that are not central to you, but that's where the decisions are made on which road in your neighborhood will be made, whether that lighting will be done, whether a new police station will be built. Maybe a small cog in this big system that you're trying to deal with, but it's a very, very crucial on our everyday today lives.
Changamka, mchangamke, get involved, get into those public participation spaces. Put your thoughts there, ask those questions that you're asking, like, why these people ambao mabwenyenye ambao wameiba hizi pesa tutawafanya nini?
My first recommendation, I think I'll go back to what he said about David Munyake and these people who are our heroes. If it wasn't his bravery, we could never have known what Goldenberg was all about. And there are quite a number of these publicly spirited people who want to actually see systems running and government working. One, I'll recommend us to protect whistleblowers. That is number one. For any country that has made progress in terms of just ensuring that the public is woke, to ensure that they take care of the public resources, we need to do that. We need to protect whistleblowers. Unfortunately, we say, and maybe just to quickly, Kenya was the first country to adopt and ratify the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. It was the first country. But years later, we're still struggling with the same problems. In as much as people say that we have the proper and requisite legislations that are supposed to take us forward, I agree to an extent. But again, note that one thing, there is no legislation in Kenya, apart just from the constitution that says let us exercise our civic duty, there is no legislation that gives you and I the permission to actually go and take these resources. When somebody has stolen something from me, we know what happens in the streets. We get that person, we get my phone, we finish that person if it's mob justice. But here is a scenario where the public is just told, this person has stolen, let us take the legal process. And who are taking these legal processes? Those people, we say, that clique that is in charge of who and who is the head of prosecutor, where does he come from? So there is that need to establish an avenue for the public to actually recover state resources. In that way, we will be able to get to her point. Ronald Reagan, at some point when he struggled during the World War, the supplies for the military, people were looting government left and right and center, and he said, this is too much. I don't have enough prosecutors to actually do this. What do? Let me put up a legislation called the false claims. That regime could give me power. If I know that somebody has submitted a false claim and is never supplied, I could actually go and recover the same money from that person through a civil process, get a reward for it, and the rest goes back to the state. So we can say that we have so many legislation, we need to close that chapter, but there is that space of where is the mwananchi, what we are speaking right now. And then I say about the issue of also just the evolution of what is corruption right now. And believe you me, if we don't fix the issue of campaign financing, we still go back to the same problem. Who are these people who fund our politicians? Yeah? And why are the politicians not responsive to our needs? It's because they have the money, they have bought all of us, they have paid for the votes and everything. So whatever they decide to do with the CDF, you can't question. They'll be like, how much did you support me in my campaigns and whatever. So we need to fix that even at the top. Even the president let us know this 1 million plates, who are these people bringing this 1 million plates?
So the extraction state, part of the extraction finances the elections that keep electing the extractors, and it becomes a revolving, a revolving door. Close for us, Monaja. No, time. We already way past time. Sorry to. Yeah, we already way past time. So, what did Mwalimu Nyerere do, and what can we do?
Okay, sometimes it can be unproductive to say this happened here, so it should happen here. Of course, granted, Tanzania has a different history from Kenya. Kenya was settler colonialism. Tanzanian's colonialism was a little bit different. Nevertheless, at independence, both presidents had some sort of goodwill. If you look at what Nyerere did in his case, Azimio la Arusha Declaration for Self-Reliance, he virtually banned government officials from engaging in business. Cabinet ministers could not own shares in a company. Cabinet ministers could not own more than 2 houses. As opposed to what happened 4 years after here, Ndegwa Commission, where civil servants were given the leeway to do business. And now that is where corruption grew.
It was officialized.
Yes, it was institutionalized. Corruption is a symptom, in our case, is a symptom of a compound between state power and capitalism, which is production for profit in private hands. So what production for profit in private hands? Profit is bottom line, profit, nothing else. So what that follows no morals, that follows no scruples. We just want profit. So what I believe we need to do collectively, I think we need to have a dedicated group of people who write a new moral code that is not defined by profit, but is defined by our needs. You produce for your needs, not for, that's why a mother's friend once said to me, when we pray, we say, give us our daily bread, not give us our daily wealth. Millions. Exactly, or our bribes, give us our daily bribes. We don't say, so daily bread. So production for the need. I think that's what the moral code that we need to write to our society's DNA. And this can be done by a movement which ultimately has to take state power to correct what we have right now, because we cannot legislate ourselves out of a colonial system. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much to our panelists. The time has moved so fast. We find ourselves, we've not really been able to give everybody a chance to say something. That to me tells me that the conversation was engaging. And this is the beginning of that conversation. In the next show, we are going to talk about the natural progression from the colonial state, the extractive state, to what we call tribalism or divide and rule, and how that then benefits from what we've been discussing today. How that the system, furthers itself through divide and rule, through favoritism, through nepotism. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Tonia, Odhiambo Ramogi, Darius, Philip, and Monaj, the artist, historian, and all of you, the participants. Apologies that we didn't get to have everybody to have a chance to say something. And we look forward to the next section of the show.